The flowers landed in her hands, like they had been aimed there. I watched it happen from the back of the reception hall. The toss, the reaching hands, the small explosion of laughter from the crowd. And then I watched Nora Turner look down at the bouquet in her hands, with an expression I had never seen on her before. Not triumph, not embarrassment. Something quieter than both of those. Something that looked, from where I was standing, like a decision. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at me. And then she walked straight across the room, sat down in the empty seat beside mine, set the bouquet on the table between us, and said, "I've been waiting 3 years for this moment." I had been best friends with Nora Turner for 5 years. I thought I knew every expression her face was capable of making. I was wrong about that. My name is Daniel Reeve. I'm 34. I work in urban logistics, the part of city planning nobody finds interesting at dinner parties, which suits me fine because I am better at listening than talking. I live in the same apartment I moved into 6 years ago, mostly because I replaced the bad lighting and now it feels like mine. I make coffee the slow way every morning because it is the one part of the day that doesn't require me to be efficient. Nora Turner came into my life through a trivia night she was not supposed to be at. She had shown up at the pub for someone else's team. There had been a scheduling mix-up, a group chat she had been added to by accident. A Tuesday evening she had shown up for anyway, because she had already taken the bus. My team had a spare seat. Her team, it turned out, did not technically exist. She sat down. She answered a question about 19th century railway architecture that none of the rest of us knew the answer to. We won. I tried to look up the answer later to see if she had been right. She had been exactly right. That was 5 years ago. Since then, she had become the person I texted when something annoying happened at work, and the person who showed up at my door with takeout when something worse than annoying happened anywhere else. She knew which coffee I ordered at which cafes depending on my mood. I knew that she kept a small rubber stamp of a fern on her desk and used it on the corners of notebooks because it made starting a new page feel less blank. I knew she argued with film endings, but cried at the beginnings. I knew the specific silence that meant she was working through something she hadn't decided whether to say yet. She was 32. She managed operations for a small architectural firm. She had a laugh that took a second to arrive, but once it arrived, it took over the whole room. She wore a metal watch her grandmother had left her that sat slightly loose on her wrist and clinked against her coffee cup every morning. The watch clink was the sound my mornings were missing when she wasn't there. I had told myself many times that this was a normal thing to notice about a person you were close to. I had several follow-up arguments prepared for the moments when I didn't quite believe myself. Her sister Caitlin's wedding had been planned for nearly 2 years. Nora had been maid of honor, which meant she had been half absent for the last 3 months, venue calls and dress fittings, and a hen weekend in Edinburgh that she came back from looking exhausted in the specific way that means you spent the whole time looking after everyone else. I had picked her up from the station when she got back from Edinburgh. She had fallen asleep in the passenger seat before we reached the motorway. I had turned the radio down without deciding to and driven the rest of the way in quiet. I told myself that was a normal thing to do for a friend. I had the arguments ready. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September, the kind of day that couldn't decide if it was still summer. The venue was a converted farmhouse an hour outside the city. Stone walls, long tables, candles that started flickering by 4 in the afternoon when the light changed. I had been invited as Nora's guest, which technically made me her +1, which I had not thought about at all until I was standing in the car park in a suit that still smelled faintly of the dry cleaners and realized I had no idea what a +1 was supposed to do at a wedding that meant a great deal to the woman he was accompanying. I decided the answer was whatever she needed. She found me outside before the ceremony. She was in a dress the color of deep sage, her hair pinned up except for two pieces that had already escaped on either side of her face, and she was holding her phone against her chest like she was deciding whether to throw it into the hedgerow. "Caitlin's florist sent the wrong shade of ribbon on the aisle arrangements," she said. "I have been awake since 5 in the morning. I have fixed 8 things. This is the 9th. Do not tell me it looks fine." "The ribbon is wrong," I said. "It's very noticeable." I noticed it immediately. She looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "That's the correct answer." She put her phone away. Something in her shoulders came down slightly. She stood beside me for a moment, looking at the farmhouse, the pale stone, and the last of the afternoon sun catching the upper windows. "It's going to be a good day," she said. It sounded like she was deciding that, not reporting it. "Yeah," I said. "It is." She looked at me once, briefly. Then she went back inside to fix the 9th thing. The ceremony was exactly what Caitlin had wanted, which I knew because Nora had described it to me in detail 3 separate times over the past month while she was coordinating it. I watched the parts I was supposed to watch. I also watched Nora, standing at the front in her sage dress, holding Caitlin's bouquet during the vows, with the careful attention of someone trusted with something breakable. When Caitlin cried, Nora reached over and squeezed her hand once without looking away from the officiant, like she had known the exact moment it was coming. I thought, she has been paying attention to her sister the way I pay attention to her. I filed that away somewhere I didn't look at directly. The reception moved quickly in the way receptions do. Speeches and toasts and the long slide from afternoon into evening, candles taking over from the windows, the room becoming warmer and louder and less formal as the hours passed. I talked to people I didn't know and found myself reasonably good at it. I ate the fish. I had 2 glasses of wine. I kept finding Nora across the room, managing something, laughing with someone, pausing to check her phone and frown, and then put it away and laugh again. Once, she caught me looking. She raised her eyebrows in a way that meant, "Everything fine over there?" I raised mine back, yes. She nodded and turned back to whatever conversation she was in. I looked down at my wine glass and recognized that I had been tracking her movement around the room the way you track a fire to make sure it's staying in the hearth. This seemed like relevant information. I set it to one side. The bouquet toss happened at 8:30. I had drifted to the back of the hall because someone at my table had started explaining a property investment strategy in detail, and I had decided that the back of the hall was preferable. I was mildly concerned about the property investment man and his chairs and whether they were bolted to the floor. They were not. I had checked. The crowd of women gathered near the small stage. Caitlin was laughing, her back to them, the bouquet held above her head. I watched the arc of it, white and cream flowers spinning slowly through the light. And then I watched it drop directly into the hands of Nora Turner, who had not been reaching for it, who was standing slightly to the side with her arms half raised mostly in self-defense, who caught it anyway, with the reflexes of someone who did not like to drop things. The crowd cheered. Someone whooped. Nora looked down at the flowers in her hands. And then she looked up, and she looked directly at me. And something happened in her face that I had no existing category for. She held the bouquet against her chest. She started walking. She sat down in the chair beside mine, and she placed the bouquet on the table between us, and the candle nearest to her threw light across her face. And she said, "I've been waiting 3 years for this moment." I looked at her. She looked back. "That's a long sentence," I said. 3 years is a long time, she said. I did not have an immediate follow-up. I had poor survival instincts around Turner women, and this was apparently not restricted to the one I had known for 5 years. I looked at the bouquet. White and cream roses with small dark leaves woven through. It had a slight lean to the left from where it had spun through the air. 3 years, I said eventually. Roughly. She tilted her head slightly. It could have been 3.5. I'm rounding down. In which direction does rounding down go in this context? Toward the moment it became impossible to avoid knowing, she said. Away from the moment I started being careful about it. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. How careful? I said. Very careful. She looked at the bouquet. Careful enough that I am standing here holding someone else's wedding flowers, having a conversation that is apparently happening in our normal register, and I have to say that is both reassuring and slightly maddening. I almost smiled. I didn't. Nora, I said. Yes. What are you saying? She was quiet for a moment. The room moved around us, music, laughter, the distant clink of glasses. And she sat in it the way she sat in difficult things, with her spine straight and her hands still. I'm saying, she said, that the Edinburgh weekend was the second time I had to listen to someone describe a person who was clearly not good enough for me. And I sat there and I said the polite things, and I came home, and you picked me up from the station, and I fell asleep in your car. And when I woke up, the radio was off. She paused. You turned it off. I don't know when. I don't know if you noticed you were doing it. I had noticed. And I thought, she continued, that I was going to tell myself the same thing I had been telling myself for 3 years, which was that this was just how it felt to have someone who knew you well. But I was very tired, and I couldn't quite find the argument, and I stopped looking for it somewhere on the motorway. I looked at her. She met my eyes and held them with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided not to look away. You don't have to do anything with that, she said. I know this is Caitlin's wedding. I know this is not the moment. I'm not asking you to. She stopped. I caught the bouquet, and you were standing at the back of the room, and I realized the only place I wanted to take it was to you. She looked down once, then back up. So, the room was very loud and also very far away. So, I said. So, she said. I looked at her and I thought about 5 years. I thought about the trivia night and the railway question and the takeout deliveries and the way she used a fern stamp on the corners of notebooks. I thought about the Edinburgh station and the radio and the motorway in the dark and all the arguments I had built and rebuilt and never quite believed. Nora, I said. Yes. I turned the radio off before we'd left the car park. She went very still. I turned it off, I said, because you had your head against the window and you were about 40 seconds from falling asleep when I had been listening to you run yourself flat for 3 months over your sister's wedding. And I wanted you to get 1 hour of quiet. I stopped. I noticed I was doing it. She looked at me for a long moment. 3 years, she said softly. About that, I said. I could check. She laughed once, quietly, in a key I hadn't heard before. Not her usual laugh. Something smaller and more real. Daniel, she said. Yeah. I changed your contact name in my phone, she said. About 2 years ago. You've never seen it. What does it say? She turned slightly pink in a way I found extremely interesting. It says something that I will show you later when I have more courage. She paused. It says, home. Something in me snapped quietly into place. like a door that had been leaning closed for a long time, finally catching the latch. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers where it rested beside the bouquet. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held mine. Once, firmly, like she was making sure it was real. And then her fingers settled between mine and stayed. We sat like that for a moment. From across the room, Caitlin appeared with 2 glasses of champagne and a look on her face that suggested she had been watching for longer than either of us would ever be told. She set both glasses on the table, looked at our joined hands, looked at Nora, looked at me, and said nothing at all except, "The dessert table opens in 5 minutes." Then she walked away. Nora looked at me. "She knew," she said. "Clearly," I said. "She's been waiting for this," she said. "How long?" Nora considered. "Possibly longer than I have." I looked at her, the escaped pieces of hair, the sage dress, the slight lean of the bouquet between us, and I thought. Nothing about this appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. 3 months later, she showed me the contact name on her phone. I took longer than she expected to react, which she interpreted correctly as me not trusting my face. A year after that, she moved the fern stamp from her desk at work to the desk in the spare room I had converted, because she had started spending more mornings there than at her own flat, and she said she needed her corners to feel less blank. I did not say anything about this. I just made coffee the slow way for 2. 2 years later, when people asked how we got together, and people did ask, often, because Caitlin had apparently made it a small personal project to tell the story at every available opportunity, Nora's answer was always the same. She said, "I caught the bouquet, and I carried it to the only place I wanted it to go." And I said, "I turned the radio off in a car park." And people looked between us like they weren't sure which of those was the beginning. It was both. It was neither. It was probably somewhere on a motorway in the dark. When she fell asleep in the passenger seat, and I stopped looking for my arguments, and the city lights came and went through the windows, and I drove the rest of the way in, quiet and did not mind at all. What would you have done if someone you had quietly loved for years suddenly crossed a crowded room and told you they had been waiting? And have you ever stopped looking for the reason to say nothing and realized you'd already made your decision? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.